Today's guest on the Engaged Parish podcast is Chris Lewis. Chris is the illustrator behind Baritus Catholic Illustration, a convert to the Catholic faith with a professional background in graphic design and a love for illustration. This project came to fruition through a parallel journey in discovering the truth of Christianity through Catholicism and a return to drawing after many years of setting it aside. The two paths converged after a series of spiritual and intellectual conversions in 2018. The idea of beginning a project focused on sharing the Catholic faith through art was born. Baritus is an artistic project dedicated to preserving the legacy of our rich Catholic artistic traditions, but in a way that resonates today. And with that, Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be here and get to talk about art and beauty, all the things that I consume myself with every day.
It's great to have you here, Chris. And I know our audience is very excited for this conversation. So let's dive in. And for those that aren't familiar with your story, I know that you've been on many podcasts, many videos that have outlined your truly amazing conversion story. But can you give us a general background of what that story is and your conversion to Catholicism?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was raised as in a nominal Christian family. We were kind of like considered Bible Christians. We had the Bible. We went to mass sometimes on Sunday, or sorry, mass. That was later. We went to church sometimes on Sundays, but we didn't really have anything outside of that kind of grounded us in any kind of faith. We didn't live a liturgical life or anything like that. And as I got into my teenage years, I really started to question some of the things that we were kind of taught through that faith tradition. And I just found that the answers were really lacking there in that history. And of course, once I became Catholic, I realized how the church had fragmented during the Reformation and everything. But it was meeting my wife in my late teens, who took me to my first Catholic church ever. Actually, on her first date, she said she had to go to mass, and I attended with her, and that just opened up all the doors for me. I started asking questions about the faith. Why do you do this? Where did this come from? Started reading the scriptures again, but more through a Catholic lens, through the things that her and her family were explaining to me. And through this journey, I was just knocked over the head with the beauty of it, the truth of it, everything just really spoke to me. And I eventually converted into the church when we got married. And even though that was the first step, I followed a very weaving path. And so there was many conversions, actually. That first one was just kind of having an openness again to Christianity, because I rejected it really in my teenage years, and then finding it again through Catholicism and being open to it. And then just learning everything, I started to have a really strong, profound intellectual faith. But after having a pretty serious health issue in my early 30s, I realized that just knowing stuff about the faith isn't enough. Like, it has to be something that really takes root in the heart, changes me. And so it was after that, and just having a really strong spiritual conversion, that was one of the things that actually led me back into doing illustration again. But this time, just being grateful to God through carrying me through this whole journey, I started to devote myself to actually drawing Catholic themes and subjects, and that's how Baritus really started in the beginning. So I would have never imagined this, like being raised in the family I was in, now being a Catholic, uh, not just a Catholic, but a Catholic artist, and doing this professionally now. It's just been an unbelievable journey. And, it's only by looking backwards that I can see God kind of uh, placing my foot in all the right paths and right directions. But I didn't see it coming really until I looked around, and I'm like, wow, I'm a Catholic illustrator. This is amazing.
Yeah, and I'm thankful you followed that call because your art is just absolutely beautiful. We'll mention this at the end as well, but I certainly want to, with the Christmas season coming up soon, I want to mention that you have an Etsy store, and so if folks just search Baritus Catholic, I'm sure that store comes up. And is that really the primary way folks can engage with your art and even purchase it on different mediums?
Yeah, that's a great place to find, gifts for Christmas. You can also go to just barituscatholic.com, and that kind of links to my social media, to my shop, and everywhere. And so I do have a lot of work on social media that I don't necessarily have in the shop. So if you just kind of want to get a sense of the type of work I do, that's a great place to follow the day-to-day illustrations I'm putting out. But yeah, any of those places will get you get my work in front of you, and be able to expose you to some of the things I'm working on in these last 6 or 7 years.
Excellent. And you just sort of mentioned the inspiration behind the founding of Baritus Catholic and how things going on in your personal life
Hmm.
moved you to actually start drawing for the faith. Could you describe, though, your really the unique look and aesthetic that you have, because you're interweaving certainly traditional elements. It's beautiful art, but yeah, what was that inspiration behind your particular style?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if I think about kind of like how I even got to where I am, a lot of it started by traveling a lot throughout the world, and we would back when I was a little bit younger, we would go to a lot of the big cities in Europe, and that's kind of where I started to first find myself in some of these just magnificent, beautiful churches that are historic, places like Rome, where you have 120 something churches, one on almost every corner, and everyone you walk into, could essentially be, an art gallery. And it was just like heaven on earth. I would walk into these places and I would see this beauty, and my mind almost like couldn't comprehend it. And this is kind of what started to inspire me, this idea that, well, God did give me some kind of talents. Maybe I can use this in some way. But the thing is, I wasn't a painter and I wasn't a sculptor. I've always been an illustrator. For all of my life, I've really stuck to pen and paper and watercolor and that sort of thing. And I went into a career in graphic design, so that kind of took me away from illustrating for a while. But as I was looking at this work that the church has produced over hundreds of years, and I started to think, okay, where do I fit into this picture? Like, if I'm not a sculptor, I'm not a painter, could I use my illustration, could I use my graphic design background and kind of orient those things in a way that's maybe unique and speaks more to people of this age, but still retaining all the truth and all of the aesthetic elements that were there in those, Renaissance paintings, for example. Could I do that? And we have such beauty in this Catholic Church, but if people aren't going through the doors of the church, how do they see it? And so that's kind of where I thought, I'll take this graphic design experience, I'll take my illustration experience and my work doing commercial products and things, but I'll do it with this Catholic perspective, something that people could take out into the streets, and it'd be just a simple way to evangelize. And that's really how it got started.
Yeah, and you mentioned the ability of art and beauty to evangelize, and it's maybe somewhat intuitive, but I think it's worth maybe delving into that a little bit more in a little bit more depth. And I actually want to read a quote that I saw from Bishop Barron, because Word on Fire, of course, also takes this idea of beauty very seriously. And it's almost like we've been seeing this resurgence of beauty in the
Yeah.
church. So this quote, it says, Catholicism is a very beautiful religion, and that beauty has the power to claim us. The beautiful does not merely entertain, rather, it invades, chooses, and changes the one to whom it deigns to appear. It opens the mind to a consideration of ever higher forms of the beautiful, conducing finally to the transcendent source of beauty itself. So maybe expand upon or go into more depth of what Bishop Barron is mentioning here, but also the role that beauty has in evangelization, and maybe even how examples of how, maybe folks have reached out and said that your art has helped evangelize them or evangelize others.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You look back at the history of the church, and art has been there since the beginning. And of course, we went through a lot of controversies during iconoclasm and things like that. But the church ultimately came out of that and said, no, sacred art should be used everywhere in our world. It should be used in the mass. It should be used in our churches. It should be used out in the byways. That was one of the things that clicked in my head and said, okay, I can take my Catholic faith and I can take it out into the streets through art and represent the Catholic faith that way to a culture, as John Paul II says, as a culture that's largely been disconnected from the faith. And John Paul II is another one who can piggyback off of what Barron's saying here, because he wrote this letter to artists where he basically says art can be used as that bridge that brings the faith back to a culture that's long since abandoned it. And I totally agree with that. So you look at the history of the church, and you see that the church has employed art in this way. So, when they finally determined that, okay, iconoclasm, that is a heresy, art should be used in all these different ways, they called artists to really step up and bring beauty out into the world again. At the Council of Trent during the Reformation, artists were one of the first things that the Council Fathers like they were one of the first people that they turned to, because they wanted to use art as a way to kind of engage the people that were falling away from the faith and bring them back to those truths that are underneath that beauty. The beauty was just the first step. It was the way to like reach the heart without arguments, without, combative, differences during the Reformation, but just speak to the heart and bring them back to that mystery and that beauty. And then from there, it kind of unlocks all of the things that are underneath of it, all the truth and the goodness. And so they really work, the transcendentals there of truth, goodness, and beauty, they all work together, and you can't separate them really. And Bishop Barron talks a lot about this. And I, you know, I love that we have a faith that actually engages this part of our tradition and calls people with talents, because God did give artists these talents, and he gave it to us ultimately, not just to make cool stuff that we find interesting, but to really bring people back to him. So it's just one big circular participation in that life of beauty. So yeah, it's beautiful.
Hey there, sorry for this brief interruption, but we wanted to give you a quick heads up. If you're enjoying the Engaged Parish, head over to ecatholic.com/podcast and sign up for our newsletter. There you'll get updates on new episodes, behind the scenes content, and more. And of course, this show is brought to you by eCatholic, the engagement platform of the Catholic Church. Be sure to check us out at ecatholic.com. Now back to the show.
As we think of art, I mean, my mind goes to stained glass windows, sacred art, paintings and statues in churches, and even just the churches themselves. Do you think that there's also a need and a space for, let's say a parish's digital presence to incorporate the beautiful, especially in today's world, which is more and more digital?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially the church should be kind of like the spearheading any movement for beauty. So in whatever way we're putting ourselves out into the world, into the culture, we should be putting a beautiful foot forward first, and we should be reaching the culture that way. These days more than ever, we're online all the time. I mean, everybody's carrying a phone around, everybody's online. I think there's like 97% of people, like from teenage up to like midlife, like they're all online at this point. And so one of the places, it's the town square now. Places like social media are kind of like the town square, but also the websites that kind of present the culture of individual parishes out in the world. Like those are great ways to, just reach people. When people are desperate and they're searching for something and they don't know where to turn, a lot of people out there will turn to a church. They might be going through some hard times and say to themselves, like, I should go back to church, or I feel this call or this longing to go back and just sit in silence with our Lord. And, so that's one of those benefits of the website and being just with technology now. You're going to search out a parish that you can stop into if you haven't been into one for years, and you want to make sure that your parish is visible and it's beautiful, and it engages the people that are there, longing for it and searching for it. I think a lot of people are longing for beauty and don't realize it. So it's kind of the artist mission to remind the culture that this really is important.
Yeah. We were talking about this a little bit before we jumped onto the live show here. We had a number of questions come through for folks that are attending live, from folks that are attending live, regarding resources where they can find sacred art to incorporate into their website or their bulletins or whatever the case might be. And they were asking for resources there. And you and I were kind of racking our brains to see if we could find any. And I think the answer you finally came to was important. Do you want to explain the answer that you kind of gave me there at the end of our conversation before we went live?
Sure. I mean, there are a lot of resources out there that parishes can use to find, beautiful images, beautiful, photography and things like that. But really, if it's disconnected from that actual parish and from the culture at that parish, that can be a big miss. So one of the best things a parish can do is kind of pull the elements from their own culture there. Like, are there things that are within their own parish grounds, within their own churches, that are kind of like landmarks for that parish, that kind of represent the culture, or represent the feeling or the aesthetics of that parish. And I'm kind of like a low budget artist. People ask me all the time, like, what are they want to know, like, what my tool set is. And really, I just use a basic drawing software and the generic preset pen, and I just draw, like, nothing fancy, all pretty much very simple. And I know parishes don't a lot of times have the time or the budgets to go around and like, you know, capitalize on these resources at their parish, but almost every parish probably has a photographer there, or at least somebody interested in photography. Start there if you need to. Pull the resources in your parish. This used to be the way that it was, for hundreds of years. Is the community there at the parish? They were the ones making things happen. And I haven't been to a parish yet where there isn't a photographer. And, you might be surprised to find, hey, they would love to go and take some photographs of your beautiful statues or the paintings you have there, of the architecture. And you can start using those things as ways to implement them into your website, to kind of give people a feel for your culture and for your environment there, who maybe haven't been to your parish, and it might start to engage them and be like, oh, this is a beautiful place. I need to go check it out. So we don't necessarily have to go, full scale into like stock photography that can get pretty expensive. Always start with what's authentic and what you actually own there, at your own church. And I think that's a great jumping off point. And then, for little subtle things and little elements of beauty and things that maybe you want to incorporate into your presence online, like you can find those little, I guess, like ornamental type things to work into that. But you really want to have it connected to what someone's going to experience when they step through your church doors. They're going to be familiar with it already if they've seen it on your website, and they're going to feel like they're home.
Yeah, one of the things that we try to hammer home as well for here at eCatholic is obviously there's a utility aspect to your website. You're communicating information. Folks are going there to find sacrament times, things like that. You of course want to think about that. But I also think there's a way to communicate beautifully, meaning thinking through things in a logical way, not trying to cram too much onto a certain web page. Even thinking about white space. Now, I know you're not necessarily a website designer by trade, but do you have any elements that you incorporate into your art that maybe could be a takeaway for folks that are reflecting upon ways to make their website more beautiful?
Yeah, I think there's really a lot of crossover there. So whether you're designing, something for print or something for web, really the principles are going to be the same. And I think just in my 17 years of working in marketing as a graphic designer, one of the things that I tended to notice was that a lot of times clients want to overcomplicate things. So I can't emphasize enough, like, keep things simple. You don't overthink it too much, and build a hierarchy. So, one of the things that branding does, for example, is it's your logo and your icon or whatever, or, those core elements, whatever those core elements are. Those are going to be the things that kind of represent your story. And then from there, you build your story out, and you do it. It doesn't have to be super complex. It should be really simple. You should think a lot about, like, what is the story we're trying to tell? What is the purpose of our website? And then from there, you kind of build out a plan to communicate those things. And what I tend to see on a lot of websites is people just throwing it all out there, and there's not really the execution of like design principles like contrast and balance and unity and proportions and alignment and things like that. So, there's these little tricks that, because it's true, you want a website to be functional, but you also don't want people to get so lost in the content that it becomes just a utilitarian site. Like, you kind of want them to rest in the site and have it be something that's pleasurable to use, easy to use. And so that's where really executing those design principles well is what can help you tell that story and do it in a way that for the user is actually going to be, purposeful.
Absolutely. And this is going to obviously be a shameless plug for eCatholic, but eCatholic does have a number of design services that can help take exactly the elements you mentioned and incorporate them into a beautiful website. We think about things like colors, patron saints, if there's sort of a logo for the parish, or unique elements, incorporating that into the design. So for folks that just think maybe don't quite have that artistic mindset or find that overwhelming or just don't have the time, definitely reach out to us at eCatholic if you want some help with that. Chris, I want to jump to your artwork and your process. When you begin working on a new art piece, what are the first principles or ideas that you consider, and how do those principles guide your process? And sorry, I'm layering questions in here. Where do you go for inspiration as well?
Yeah. So For me, and this goes back to what I was really just saying about parishes who are trying to develop a website, like the story has to be first. So anytime I'm illustrating something, when that spark of inspiration hits me, um, it usually begins with a story. Like there's something that just engages my imagination or hooks me, whether it's something I've read from history or just doing, reflection in scripture. Um, those are typically the things that inspire me, and something will just catch me. And then when I start from there, I'm always like, okay, what is the story that I want to tell with whatever this new piece of work I'm designing is? And that always has to be first. So whatever those aesthetic details are that I eventually build out in an illustration piece, they all serve the mission of telling that story underneath. So I work a lot of symbolism into my work, and so it involves, if it's an illustration of a saint, it involves like going back and reading the life of that saint. Um, and because with illustration, you're typically condensing a life story down into one composition. It's taking those elements from their life and saying, okay, how do I represent this, either symbolically or through some kind of action that's happening in the composition? And then from there, it's just about making that story come to life through the creative process. But yeah, I mean, that's inspiration. Really, sometimes it just comes from I don't even know where. The best thing to do for me is, if I'm sitting at a computer all day working, like, take a break. It's good to go for a walk, go outside. Um, like I said, read scripture, read books, listen to music, any of these things, just being open and, I guess, kind of present to the world around me at all times, tends to be what will ignite some kind of new idea or creative pursuit. And so I try to just be open to those things and then seize them when they come. But a lot of times it's like lightning out of nowhere. I don't know, that it's all about just being open to at least, exploring those things when they do strike.
You mentioned earlier that beauty is one of the three transcendentals.
Mhm.
Um, does that mean that beauty is objective, or can beauty be subjective?
I think, God, all beauty, all the transcendentals point back to God. So I think ultimately it is objective. We might say, I like a Raphael more than a Michelangelo or something like that, but we can both agree that objectively both of those artists were pointing people back to God. And so I think there has to be that objective component to it. One of the things that, this is what got me inspired to do Catholic art, is that I saw so much of the world taking art and bringing it back down to man's level and then just subjectivizing everything. And I think once we've done that, this is kind of going back to John Paul II, the culture really disconnected itself from the purpose of art. And so it is really the call of artists to bring people back into that objective reality. And we do it by presenting these things in the faith in a way that resonates with the true, the good, and the beautiful. Because ultimately those things, when you pull on those threads, it's going to pull back to God. I can't remember if it's Bishop Barron who said this, but it's one of those things that I've also said to people, is like, nobody argues with a sunset. We see a sunset and we know that just objectively there is something good, there's something beautiful, and there's something true about it. And it does call our minds back to something higher. So I think as long as that focus is in the work that we're doing, and I know that's what orients me in the work that I do, at least. Um, I think we kind of disconnect ourselves from those subjective directions that we can sometimes go down if we're just thinking about ourselves. And we got to think about, what is that end, and what is that thing that's higher than us. And so yeah, I do think art is at least intended to be objective, and I know a lot of people make it subjective, and I think that's where we get into trouble in the modern society.
Yeah, I know St. Thomas Aquinas characterized beauty by three elements, which were wholeness, harmony, and radiance.
Mm-hmm.
So we're I guess getting a little bit philosophical here, but could you maybe get into what those three elements mean: wholeness, harmony, and radiance? And I'm sure these are, but are these elements that you think about, or principles that you think about when you're designing your own work?
Yeah. So, and I think you could even condense that down even more simply to just, I think he described beauty as that pleases when it's seen, or something to that effect. I mean, very simple. Um, And so then you can ask the question, well, like, what pleases? And it tends to be and this is interesting because, before I was even Catholic and just studying graphic design in school, those principles of like unity and wholeness and proportions and balance, like all of these things that we were being taught in graphic design school, the reason those are important is because they're just naturally present in the things that when we see it, we're pleased by it and that it's beautiful. So going back to Aquinas, I mean, those things are ingrained really in reality. So again, you can't argue with the sunset. When you see something beautiful like that, it just speaks to your heart directly. And it's again going back to how the world's kind of separated itself from that is it's taking things like the unity or the wholeness, and it distorts things and it breaks things up in weird ways, and it's always trying to push limits of what's real and what's um, shocking. So art almost becomes like for shock value, and when you start to do stuff like that, you're making a whole mess of those principles that Aquinas talks about. And a lot of times you're abandoning all of the typical graphic design principles are there too to make some kind of like edgy statement. And I think once we started to do that, we really lost the picture. And so, I mean, following Aquinas there on those three aspects, part of that is um, it's intentional, but part of it also is just if I'm focused on if I'm focused on portraying our Lord or our Lady in some kind of way, there's an objective reality there that I want to represent for other people to help bring them into that moment. And to do that in the right way, it has to be something that follows those principles. Our Lord is going to be presented in a way where, um, you know, he's dignified. Our Lady is dignified. Our Lord is dignified, and these things are raised to this higher level. And if I'm doing that, I'm not going to try and like abstract things or distort it. I'm going to show it for what it really is. And so, yeah, I mean, it's something that I guess I don't sit down before a project and just, okay, I'm going to do something here that makes sure, I make sure I follow these three principles. It's really kind of something that's just organic and being attuned to the fact that I really want to present the faith and beauty in the way that they were intended by God. And so, I mean, that's my focus is on that, and it kind of just happens organically, I guess.
Your art has definitely made an impact. I mean, I think it just shows with the followers. You've even mentioned this in other podcasts you've been on. You couldn't have expected that Baritus would have grown to the level it has as quickly as it has, except for you following God's will and for the grace of God. Have you seen a general resurgence in focus on beauty and beautiful artwork in the church over the last couple of decades?
Yeah, I have. And I love telling people about this because I get a lot of people contacting me throughout the country, throughout the world, really, that are trying to revitalize their parishes with beauty. I think there's this sense that a lot of us have that after Vatican II, kind of the craziness of people going into churches and ripping out statues and tearing down paintings and whitewashing walls, like that wasn't a good idea. All of those things served to help us dive deeper into our faith and bring us into those mysteries. The things that are unseen, art helps us to see it. But I think when we've started to look at artwork, by looking inwards and trying to represent things the way that we see it, rather than looking again at that objective truth and trying to conform ourselves to it, I think we've really discerned that this has kind of led us down a wrong path. And so what I find now is that people are starting to realize this. They're starting to say, art there, as the church has always said, as I was saying before, is there to serve that goal of union with God, and again making the unseen visible. And so I a lot of the parishes are reaching out to me. They're saying, we really haven't had a good logo or branding package. Is this something you can help us make? Or they're saying, we don't really have a lot of like sacred art in our in our church, in our halls, in our social hall, in our classrooms. Is this something that you can help with? A lot of parishes, Catholic schools and things they're trying to ask this question again and saying, okay, how do we bring beauty back into our schools? They see that or parishes enter schools. I work with a lot of different outlets, Catholic outlets. And I think that they're seeing that the art is used for teaching. It's used for helping us grow deeper in our faith. There's all these different aspects to art. And when it wasn't there, we kind of just sense like something's lacking. But when you walk into a beautiful church and it's decorated with beautiful art, you can rest in that. And it helps you be contemplative. It helps you think about the faith in a deeper way and contemplate those mysteries. And so, yeah, people are starting to sense this now, and I think they are trying to reinvigorate these things. But I've moved recently, so I had been a part of 2 different parishes, and both of those parishes were really strongly putting an emphasis on beautifying the sanctuary, the church, the spaces around the parish, and and there seems to be, and I don't know, maybe I'm like hopefully optimistic, but there does seem to be sort of this renaissance happening, where we are starting to rediscover all of those things in the artistic traditions that we lost after Vatican II. And we're saying, especially the young people coming up, they're saying, no, I want this back. Like, this is a hole that we have, and I think I want to fill this again. And so I do find that is at least being contemplated more. And a lot of the people that are coming to me are asking for that. So that's, that's wonderful.
You did kind of allude to this, but I'm sure there are many parishes and folks on this call who are wondering if you do have offerings for Catholic parishes and schools and dioceses. So I'll just ask, do you have offerings for those? And what does that look like? Again, knowing you're very busy man.
Yeah, I mean, it's really dependent on schedule, but I do everything from branding parishes, logo design, and doing branding packages, again, going back to kind of like the parish aesthetic or the parish culture there. The logo helps define that. It could be something as simple as like the colors you're using as in your logo, or the name of your parish. All those things are tied together, and then from there, you use those things to go out and build your website and to build your materials that are around your parish for the parishioners to use. All of those things are tied together. So a lot of parishes or schools that are contacting me, they start there. We need a logo, we need a branding package. Let's start there. And then from there, it branches out into all kinds of different things. I also just through my shop, like the things behind me, the posters behind me here on the wall. A lot of schools are using those to put up in their classrooms to help educate the students that are in their classrooms, or even in the narthex of churches. Some parishes will come to me and say, "Hey, we want like an illustration of our patron saint. Is this something you can do?" So really, I mean, I kind of employ both my illustration and my graphic design experience when I'm working with parishes or Catholic schools or other Catholic ministries. And really, if it's something visual there that will help serve the purpose of those institutions, that's part of what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, we mentioned this earlier. In a ever digital world, or an ever more digital world, being able to have an inviting website presence, that could be the first interaction that a potential convert or someone rediscovering their faith might have. And so taking the time to just make that professional and beautiful and clear and just thinking about communicating well through it can just really make a huge impact. And you're absolutely right. Even just sometimes starting with what color palette are we going to use? Is there a logo or some sort of unique piece of art or element to the church that can be a springboard for a cohesive design? That can be so important. I know we talked about this earlier, but could you talk about some of those other elements, or how even just having a color palette can be a really good starting point in having a cohesive design?
Yeah, I mean, people sometimes overlook this, and it could be a mistake as simple as, well, I'm just going to use my favorite colors. But that's not always the best thing you want to do. What you want to do, again, going back to story always being first, what is the story we're trying to communicate here? What is the emphasis or focus that we want to have in the things that we're designing? And color plays a huge part of that. Typography is another one. So if you have a certain patron saint, what is the story of that patron saint? That is something that should kind of permeate all of the things that you do, or kind of guide the design process a little bit, because there could be colors there that are associated with their order or some kind of like detail from their life, and hey, maybe that's like the core, and you start to build off that and branch out on your website and start to employ those things in various ways. Using contrast, using balance with the color, those are other very helpful things. And a lot of times people, we're here on your platform where you have this nice 2-color tone going on. something simple like that actually goes a lot further than trying to do like 5 or 6 colors. So it's like boiling things down to their essence. That's another part of it. And then using those colors to create contrast and create hierarchy within your design. When it comes to things like typography, um, don't put 5 or 6 different fonts on your page. Develop a branding system that maybe uses 2 fonts, and those 2 should complement each other. You shouldn't have like, a sans serif, 2 sans serif fonts that are, slightly different. It's going to look like there's a mistake. So, okay, well, what do you do? Well, maybe you have a bold sans serif font, but then you have a more lightweight serif font, and those 2 can help play off each other and help you create a hierarchy when it comes to communication. When it's building headers out and then body text, how are we going to use typography for those things? So all these decisions go into having a successful design. Ultimately, you want people to be able to go to the website. I think they say there's an attention span of like 8 seconds. So you want people to be able to get to the website, immediately be able to register the key elements. So again, having first things as the priority, and then from there, secondary and tertiary things, those take on less prominence on a website. So many websites get this part wrong, but having a nice navigation bar with contrast and clearly visible fonts is such a help, especially if you're somebody desperate looking for confession or mass times. Like, you don't want to be scrolling through the site, like trying to find a needle in a haystack. You want to be able to know where to go. So again, simplicity is really key in successful graphic design and web design. Using those design principles like balance, contrast, proportion to help create emphasis of things that are most important. And then again, color and typography, all these things kind of help share the persona or the character of your parish and the culture at your parish. And when all of these things are being used together, that's when you really see what distinguishes a website that's, fun to use, pleasurable to use, versus one that's kind of a little bit of a slog to get through.
Absolutely, yeah. The being thoughtful with those design elements, to your point, can enhance even the utility of the website in terms of just putting the focus in the right place, being very thoughtful about what content you're putting on what page, what your navigation looks like. And I'm glad you mentioned typography as well. Once again, there's that balance of what's beautiful, what sort of resonates with elements of your parish specifically, but also what can folks actually read on their iPhone or their smart device. So there is this very unique balance that has to be hit when you're thinking about specifically online mediums.
Yeah.
I do want to talk a little bit about your art specifically, because a lot of what you do is actually like tangible things. And I was listening to another podcast you did where you talked about, you even think about when you're putting together a print or thinking about how you're going to print a specific art piece, you're thinking about whether this would look good on a t-shirt or a poster. As an artist, can you talk about that element of your work, from how you determine or what thought you put into even just what substrate or material you're going to use to print a specific piece?
Yeah, I mean, all of that goes into it because, again, it's you're communicating something there that is, like you said, it's tactile, it's tangible, something you can put your hands on. So when it comes to print, and I work primarily in print, so like a lot of the things I do, there's something you can wear, something you can hang up in your home, something you can put at a prayer altar in your house. Particularly with the prayer cards and the altars, the substrates have to be something that complements whatever that piece of work is. I recently just did some memorial cards. We're in the month of praying for the holy souls, and we just had, of course, the Hallowtide, and just remembering holy souls, that got me to thinking, it'd be nice to have like a card that is like really substantial and dignified, that would be there at your side table or a home altar, that you can remember a loved one that you can pray for, right? So in this case, I had art of an angel and a tombstone, and I had a scripture reflection and a prayer. And, you could just print that on some glossy cardstock and be done with it. But I really wanted to elevate the experience. So I did it on an extra double thick card, organic paper, so it feels very natural. And then it's a card that has like dignity to it, and it even has a place that you can write in the name of the loved ones so you would remember them. So it's not just something you hold; it's something you interact with. It's something that you can touch and experience it. I do some embossed cards, for example, for the same purpose. That as you're sitting there in prayer, you can run your hand over the embossing, and it's another way to engage the art. So I find that's almost as much of the design process as just creating the illustrations themselves. Is like, okay, how am I going to present this, and how is it going to be presented in a way that complements the art and dignifies the art and makes this that it's not just another like consumer good. Like, this is something that is really dedicated towards living a spiritual life of prayer and encouragement in the faith and things like that. And so I take that pretty seriously, and I try and find new ways to do that. Metallic foils, that just kind of represents the dignity of our faith. When we think about uh our altars and the tabernacles and the gold that we typically see, or we try to incorporate into the design and architecture of our churches, all of that points again back to the glorification of God. And so putting those little touches in there that the light catches it and it reminds us of like heavenly things, I love stuff like that. And it's taking something that's just art and print and taking it to another level of interactivity, and something that you can that you interact with.
Yeah, and I just think about, Catholics have been doing this for generations, for
Yeah.
millennia, honestly.
Yeah.
When you think about, an altar cloth or a priest's vestments, it's like, would screen printing be, it might be cheaper, but is that the right way to show versus like having embroidery
Right.
on that? And so, I think Catholic artists, to your point, forever have been thinking about those elements in those substrates and what reflects the dignity of what's happening here. So as we move to wrap up, and once again, I want to let folks know where they can find your art. It's barituscatholic.com is probably the place to go, and that links to your Etsy store where folks can buy your products and things that you've created. Baritus, Baritus Catholic.com. Could you talk a little bit about the actual products that you have available on here? I know you have everything from stickers to t-shirts, but maybe talk about some of the best sellers.
Yeah, so t-shirts are definitely a bestseller. This time of year, I also do limited edition runs of hoodie sweatshirts. There you go. So, those are a huge hit. But there's an exclusivity to the things I release as far as apparel. We can only, we're a small family business. It's really just me doing all the work, and then my daughter, packing all the orders. And so we really are kind of doing this small scale. And so the apparel is very exclusive, but those are the things that people are typically after. I will be releasing a new hoodie here in about another week for the Holy Apostles. I have a new Our Lady of Victory t-shirt coming out. I've got some St. Joseph t-shirts coming out in the next week. You can also find some of the ones that are already listed on here, although inventory's going quick during this holiday season. But yeah, I sell posters, vinyl decals. I try and find the highest quality products I can find. So like the vinyl decals, they're waterproof, they're weatherproof. I've had people put them on surfboards, motorcycle helmets. They can go on vehicles. They can go on tumblers. I think I have about 250 products, maybe. I can't remember, but like in all, I've designed well over 300. Some of those are going to be in the shop at different times. When it comes to apparel, t-shirts and things, I try and print about 2 or 3 designs every month, and I'll sell through those, and then I rotate new designs in every month. So if something sells out, don't worry, it will be back. I typically try and print them again in several months. I just keep a constant rotation. Hoodies are pretty seasonal to this time of year, so if you see those and you like it, grab them fast. I started doing patches, actually. Patches have been a big hit. I'll have more patches this week, actually, I think. So lots of stuff, lots of great gift ideas for people. Holy cards, all kinds of holy cards.
Yeah, no, I've received as gifts some of the things that you produce on Etsy, and they're always absolutely beautiful. So I highly recommend folks to check out your artwork, and they make great gifts. I'm always delighted when I receive some of your art.
Thank you.
We did get some questions that came through during the registration process for this podcast and this live event. For folks that are interested in being able to hear about shows that we have coming up on the Engaged Parish podcast, you can go to ecatholic.com/podcast. We also have a new email address. So if folks have comments or like what the guests we're having, or have even suggestions of their own, we have, I believe it's producer@engagedparishpodcast.com. Brandon, our producer, will correct me if I'm wrong. I think I got it right. Yep. producer@engagedparishpodcast.com. So brand new email address if y'all have comments, or if you are not on our registration list, but want to be put on that list to hear about upcoming shows. So Chris, before I get to some of these questions from the audience, just to kind of sum up, and looking at your own journey as an artist, and what we talked about today, what, at a high level, what lessons about creativity and beauty do you want to leave people with that you think are most important specifically to parishes in their digital outreach?
Yeah. So, I didn't get to mention this earlier, but one of the big things that really put me on the trajectory of just exploring Christianity again was looking at beautiful works of art in the parishes that I was attending before I was Catholic, just going with my wife at the time. And so I never underestimate the power of beauty. And you asked me earlier, and I didn't get back to this question either, but have I heard from people where my art has maybe impacted them? And I hear from people all the time. I mean, it's unbelievable. And I thank our Lord, and I thank the Holy Spirit, because a lot of times, I'm just trying to be faithful to whatever I'm being called to. And I try and make sure that the focus is always on bringing people back to God. And I've been so blessed to hear from people that have told me like that my artwork has made some kind of difference in their life. Like, it's got them exploring the Catholic Church. It's got them coming back to their faith. It's got them evangelizing to people out in public when they're wearing my t-shirts and getting into conversations with people. And it's just I thank God, because I didn't even intend to really start a business. That kind of just unfolded for me over the years. And it was just me really, first and foremost, following my faith, and then discerning what the gifts I had were and how I give those back to God, and just being faithful to that. And so, yeah, I say, don't underestimate the power of beauty. If you're designing a website for your parish, that could be somebody's first interaction with Catholicism ever. They could just come across your webpage and, seeing maybe what the sanctuary and the altar looks like on your website might kindle in somebody, in their heart, like this desire to experience that, to know what it's about. That could something as simple as that. It could be your logo. If you design a beautifully a beautiful logo there that represents your parish and the culture there, that might be something that just gets somebody asking questions. So, and everything we do that is visual and is communicating some kind of truth through art, always put the best foot forward, especially for Catholicism. We don't want to be cheap about it. And that doesn't necessarily mean having huge budgets. It could just be having the intent and the heart to do the best you can possibly do for God, and with whatever means or resources you have, and just being aware that it does have an impact. And it's had an impact on me in my life, and it's had an impact in countless people who have reached out to tell me this themselves. So,
absolutely. And we think about, you mentioned this earlier, but the beautiful churches and cathedrals we have across the world, some which have been standing for centuries.
Yeah.
And they have no shortage of visitors every single year, even just St. Peter's. And, I think there's something that's drawing people in clearly to see these beautiful churches. And to your point, it should not be underestimated, the impact that can have on people. Yeah. And even just that first step of drawing them in, that's sometimes where it starts.
Yeah.
So
people might go to a church and, it's a museum, and they want to look at the art, and the next thing they know, they're asking profound questions about their life and like the meaning. I've heard stories on the journey home of a guy who went into one church in Rome and was instantly converted. It's unbelievable with the power, and this all comes from God. He's ultimately doing it, but being faithful to those gifts and representing the highest possible, glorifying God in the highest possible way through everything we do, with this, aesthetically in our parishes and churches and our websites and everything. Those are ways to reach the culture again. That's what John Paul II called us to do.
Absolutely. So we'll wrap up with a few questions that came through from our audience. And actually, there's one in particular that came through, excuse me, the live comments, which is from Christine. And she said, don't forget music. Many parishes are giving their parishioners a diet of music that doesn't teach the truths that we believe. I don't know if you have any comments on that, Chris.
Oh, 100%. I I went to a beautiful mass recently, and then, unfortunately the music was a little banal. And it was like, oh, that was such a it was so close to being, it had it been more traditional or minded, or a little bit more faithful to some of the hymns that are in the church. It could have really been, it's one other aspect of the whole experience when you go to mass. Like, one of the beauties of the Catholic Church is it touches all the senses. And I know a lot of people talk about this. I think Scott Hans talked about it, but we have the incense, we have the art, we have the music for the ears. All those things have to be unified. So the art, the music, the incense, like all of it, it works together to convey one message. And I 100% on that comment. I think we need to take music more seriously. And that's another thing I will say optimistically, I do see a lot of parishes trying to do better at that. And so, it starts here. We keep progressing. We could see ourselves in the middle of a renaissance.
Absolutely. And I just want to call out another comment that came through in the questions, which is, I forget who asked this, but they use Canva for their parish, which apparently is free for nonprofits. I don't think I knew that. And they gave a link, canva.com/canva-for-nonprofits. And I can definitely, I don't know if you have any comments on that, Chris, but I can definitely say for especially parishes on a budget, Canva can really be a great solution to give you some templates that have some of these design elements already thought through. And it can really be a great resource for parishes. I don't know if you have any comments on that, Chris.
Yeah, so this goes back to what I was saying. Like, you don't have to have like the premium software to do these things. Start with what you have. That might grow in time if you need it, but Canva, a lot of the clients that come to me start there. There you go. And I know a ton of parishes use it. I haven't used it just because I've been using Adobe, unfortunately, for like 25 years. So I'm kind of like, old habits die hard. Like, I don't really need to be paying for Adobe. Like, it's kind of like souped up premium. I could be using something much simpler, but I'm so used to it now. But you don't have to do that. Use what you have for sure. If making the decision to do something beautiful, if what's holding you back are those types of decisions, like, don't let that be it. Go with the free stuff. Start there.
This next comment is just asking for your commentary. Interested in how to best engage teens through the beauty of art. Any resources would be great.
So I think this has been a big focus for the church just in general in the last couple of decades. You see people like Father Mike Schmitz. I think he's really great, oriented towards young people. A lot of the art that I do was intended to hit a younger audience. I didn't see there being a lot out there for young Catholics that was really engaging. There was vintage blushing saints and things like that, which I love. Like, that stuff's great. But for, young boys, young men, there wasn't anything out there that really showed the grit and the hardness of our faith, the truth of our faith in a strong way, a masculine way. And what's funny is that I just kind of started doing this stuff naturally myself, because it's just kind of my own, that's just kind of where I lean as far as my style and things. But the women, buy my stuff more than anybody. They're buying it for their husbands, they're buying it for themselves, they're buying it for their boys and for their children. And so I think everybody's kind of had this desire to find something a little bit stronger that represents the faith in a strong way. We've seen it kind of in the lighter, happier way, but the world's kind of rough right now. We need something to call us to fortitude and to virtue. And so, yeah, as far as resources, that was a long-winded way of saying that's kind of what a lot of my focus is. There are a lot of great, podcasters. Father Mike Schmitz, for example, Ascension Press. I do a lot of work with Ascension Press. They have a ton of materials that are geared towards younger Catholics as well. I just did a book with Mark Hart for Biblical Heroes, things like that. So yeah, check out Ascension Press. They got a lot of great stuff. They've done work with Tan Books. They do a lot of great things for young Catholics. Those are a couple of off the top of my head, and involving clients I've worked with. So
yeah, and again, I think I picked this up from one of the past podcasts you were on, but You also mentioned there's a lot of college students and probably teenagers as well that are buying your stickers and
Yeah.
probably slapping them on the back of their laptops, on their water bottles, which everyone seems to be carrying around these days. And that could also just be an amazing way for someone to tiptoe into exterior evangelization, actually inviting even complete strangers in by saying, yeah, I'm proud of my faith and I want to display it. And it can also be a reminder to, to pray or reflect on something spiritual.
Yeah, it's hard to, it keeps you accountable. It's hard to sin if you're looking at an image of Our Lady or our Lord staring right back at you and you say, okay, maybe I need to check myself here. But yeah, so college students put them on their laptops all the time. And I've had tons of college students reach out and be like, yeah, people are always asking me about the sticker. It's a great way to evangelize. That's what I love about art is that, it's not about, arguments and like, trying to prove to somebody that you're right by using like the best arguments. It's really something that bypasses all that and it goes right to the soul and to the heart and it just speaks to people.
Yeah. And so the next question, this actually came up again from the audience. I'll read it the way that they have it, and then I might add a little bit of a nuance to it. The comment here says, I'm in a battle with older parishioners who say that only the altar and crucifix, no statues, art, or embellishments should be in the church as per Vatican II. Not trying to stir up controversy, of course, but I don't know if this is something you've thought about or have comments on. There was clearly some level of reaction coming out of Vatican II, but was that the intention? And any other comments or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've definitely no like professional scholar on Vatican II. I've read through some of the documents just in my own learning, like on my own path of learning. I don't recall anything like that in the documents of Vatican II. In fact, I kind of I remember the opposite. John Paul II has said the opposite post Vatican II, that and the Council of I'm blanking on it now, whether it was Nicaea or Florence, but whatever one of those councils it was that addressed the iconoclasm controversy, they call for these things everywhere. So they call for sacred images, holy art, to be in the churches, outside the churches, in your homes, everywhere. It's one thing I didn't explain in my story about my conversion, but when I met my wife and her family, their house was covered with artwork, Catholic artwork. Every room of their house, her mother put up something in every room. And I knew nothing about the saints. It was an amazing opportunity for me to walk around and ask her questions about these stories and like, what does this mean? And what is this? And I loved being in her house because it just felt so comforting. I felt like I was in this heavenly home with all the saints because they're constantly, around me. Well, this is the same reality that we make in our churches. Like, we shouldn't forget that when we're there at Mass, we're there at Mass with all of heaven, and the saints are there with us. And one of the ways that the church has reinforced that, and what Council of Trent called artists to do, was remind people of this, that our Catholic faith is not just horizontal, it's vertical. It goes, backwards in time, forwards, it's multidimensional. And one of the ways that we kind of represent that and show it and live it is by using art in our parishes, in the stained glass windows, in the paintings, in the statues. And so, no, I don't recall Vatican II ever saying that. I recall them, and I think that happened as a consequence of the spirit of the age more than the council itself. I just think there was a sort of iconoclasm taking place in the 60s and 70s, and people were trying to tear everything down and reinvent it. And unfortunately, the church got sucked into that, but that was not because of anything that was said at Vatican II. So I would charitably push back on people making that claim. Get your pastor involved in it. Have those discussions. Ask them where they're seeing that type of thing called for in history. Because if you go back into the documents of history, as I was just explaining, you actually find quite the opposite.
Yeah, and certainly, things change. But to your point, there are centuries of precedent, we can call it, of the church actually going that extra mile to produce some of the most beautiful art that the world has ever seen for the service and glory of God. Any other final thoughts or comments that you have to leave with our audience today?
I'm just grateful for the time to talk about the faith and art. I mean, like I said at the beginning, it's two of my favorite things to talk about. It consumes all of my time, and to see that so many people seem to be taking more of an interest in it, excuse me, in these recent years, even just since I started my company, has really been a blessing, because when I started doing this art, I wasn't really aware of any contemporary artists that were doing anything. And, like I said, a lot of the churches were kind of stripped barren. And, it's kind of a bleak place to be as an artist. It's like, do we even really value art anymore? And do we appreciate it? And I can honestly say that in the 6 or 7 years that I've been running this company, that I absolutely see that it still holds a very prominent place in our faith. Catholics want it to be reinvigorated again. I think we are longing for a renaissance. And so any of these occasions to talk about it and to consider the questions about what art is, what is it used for, how do we put a beautiful foot forward for the rest of the world, I, this is pretty much what I devote my time to. And so I just appreciate you having me on to be able to talk through some of this. And I'm around online. Anybody can contact me anytime with questions about art or the faith, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, you have quite a few followers. Could you mention the social platforms, or maybe barituscatholic.com is a good place to find those social channels?
Yeah, you can find all of my main ones through my website. I am on Instagram is probably where I'm most active. That's where most of my art is, most of my followers. Facebook is sort of just an echo of my Instagram. And then Twitter, I'm on there for random ideas about art and things going on in the culture. I've recently tried to get my YouTube page going. I'm posting more process videos, and I have a couple ideas that I will hopefully be releasing soon to, again, just find new ways to engage people in the faith through art in the mediums that we have available to us. So whether it's video, music, art, how do we combine all these things together as one presentation? So YouTube will be a place where I start to explore some more of that. But yeah, you can check out my website and pretty much find me on any of those platforms. Baritus Catholic is the destination for any of those platforms.
Excellent. I'm going to drop a subtle hint here. Chris and eCatholic have been talking about a potential collaboration. So I don't want to make any promises. Chris, I know you're a busy man. But, just something for our listeners to be on the lookout for is a potential collaboration, hopefully coming down the pike sometime soon. So more to come on that, hopefully. Stay tuned. And, once again, I want to mention for anyone interested today in, just they might work at a school or parish, barituscatholic.com is probably the best place to go. Is there a contact form on that page that folks can find?
There is a contact form there. You can reach me by email through that form. And I apologize. I try and stay on top of messages, but between DMs and emails and the shop communications, like it can be a lot. It can be a full-time job sometimes, but I try and get to them when I can. And I haven't actually, sometimes it wasn't possible for me to get to all of them. I do have an FAQ on my page as well, which answers a lot of the questions I get often.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Chris. This was very insightful. I hope all of our listeners pulled some great elements that they can take back to their Catholic organizations. I want to put out a reminder as well, too, that if you're interested in, if some of the design things are just overwhelming, in addition to reaching out to Chris, eCatholic has some direct website design services. You can find those at ecatholic.com/services. And I also want to mention, now that we have 5 or 6 of these Engaged Parish podcast episodes under our belt, please, if you could, find us on Apple Podcasts, find us on Spotify, find us on YouTube, and give us a rating. 5 stars means a lot to us. Give us a subscribe and a like. We want these to be valuable to everyone who listens. So please give us that feedback. And if you could, give us those thumbs up. That's going to help us just have the reassurance that these are useful, and to go ahead and produce more episodes of the Engaged Parish podcast and have great guests like we did today with Chris Lewis. So thanks again, Chris. God bless. Have a great day.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you.